We can go live now to Brussels, where we're going to join Vanessa for a closer look at the issues over there. Vanessa, thanks very much for being with us. Let's talk about the main issue. We've heard that the EU Supreme Court, of course, backing that bill, but more about the verdict and what's likely to come out of that.
Well, basically, the European Court of Justice said the European Union was fully legally in the right when it decided to impose this new carbon emission system for the aviation industry. It said that the case brought by these two US carriers and the US aviation body, the Trade Association for US Airlines, that was actually not correct, that the new EU rules do not infringe on national sovereignty, nor do they infringe on anything that's been agreed internationally among the airlines. Now, where does this leave carriers? Well, they have already said they will potentially take this to a much higher court and also do a kind of joint action suit involving the UN aviation body ICAO. However, the EU says, well, actually, we've been proved legally right. There's very little that you can do to now challenge this, despite all the threats that have been coming from a range of capitals around the globe, not least, of course, Washington. You've got a number of measures going on there. You've got the Senate apparently looking at a bill to try and overturn this ruling by the EU, which would effectively make it very, very difficult for US airlines to comply with the EU demands. And just a few hours ago, the US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said, well, we will take appropriate action if you force this through. What a lot of people don't like is what apparently seems to be this kind of arrogant, unilateral way that the EU has acted without consulting enough with other airlines. The EU retaliates, well, look, we've been trying to get a deal on a global level for over 10 years. Enough is enough. It's time that airlines also started paying for the way that they pollute. This will make it more expensive for them to pollute. If they don't like it, they don't have to fly to Europe.
Well, clearly this story isn't over yet. It may just be beginning, but tell us about the new regulations and the likely impact it will have on global carriers.
Well, of course, the first concern for the carriers is the cost. Now, here there's a big debate going on about exactly what that cost will be. The EU has always argued that actually it's minimal because 85% of those emissions permits are going to be given out for free, and therefore take a long-haul flight, say from London to Beijing. The EU says that will cost per passenger one way 12 euros more. The airlines argue, well, actually it will be a lot more, potentially up to 40 euros more. So put that, on a return journey for two people, you're looking at around 1,001 potentially extra in airfares. Of course, that will be the passenger who will have to pay for this. But it's not just that. It's also the technical requirements, because a lot of these carriers have not before had to try to calculate their carbon emissions in the very rigorous way that the EU is now requiring them to do. It takes a lot of adjustment. There's also a lot of one-off costs to do with that. And of course, there's a kind of political fallout from this. It's not just about, these journeys that are being done to and from European airports. Airlines feel aggrieved, and they're looking now at ways to hit back. We've already seen the kind of rumblings of trade disputes between China, for instance, and the EU. This is also being mirrored in Russia, in India, which is extremely unhappy about this and is potentially going to be launching the next legal challenge. And then you could have a whole range of tit-for-tat reprisals. For instance, Moscow already said, well, look, if you, the EU, are going to be imposing this scheme, we, Russia, could start charging airlines that use our airspace, not just our airports, but our airspace. So imagine the kind of spiral that will trigger. At the end of the day, hard to see really how this is going to play out. The new rules come into force on January the 1st. The EU says a lot of the airlines, even those that have protested, have already been applying to buy these carbon permits. They hope it will all quieten down fairly quickly. Whether it will, well, we'll see in the coming months ahead.
I don't think there's any chance of that, but Vanessa Mock over in Brussels, thank you very much for joining us over here.